please raise your hand and the microphone will come to you.
I'll ask a question. Talk a little bit more, if you would, about Pakistan. A lot of people consider that to be such a tinderbox.
Well, Obama came out on Egypt the other day and he said Egypt's not an ally, even though it technically is, and is not an enemy. I think it's fairly clear that if Obama was asked about Pakistan, he'd be saying the same thing. These relationships are changing pretty dramatically. Pakistan, like Egypt, has a strong military that's generally well disposed to working with the United States, but also has strong elements of tolerance and support of Islam within it. They also have a very, very weak, somewhat more technocratic government that has very limited capacity to build their economy. And the level of international support for Pakistan, like the level of international support for Egypt, is not going to be anywhere near what they need to keep that economy afloat. The Chinese have been very reluctant to put real money into Pakistan to help them out with loans because they see it as miasma, and furthermore, the Chinese do not want to antagonize the Indians unnecessarily by filling that vacuum, and so they're being careful. Very smart on the part of Beijing. They don't want to play that game. The India-China relationship economically is actually working out very well. So, good news is that Pakistan-India conflict doesn't blow up. We don't see Pakistan becoming geopolitically a tinderbox. But, level of conflict, up. Security risk for expats and your companies working there clearly are going to be very significant. Ability of them to improve their economy, even in things they've done very well historically, like textile development, going to be low because the infrastructure is going to be poor. Will we see any moves towards reform in the government? No. Final point, of course, is they've got nukes. And they've shown historically through the AQCon network a willingness to try to export that technology. Yes, that should worry us, but not in a defined, I should take action kind of way. I mean, there are some of these existential risks out there that are sort of interesting that you can't do anything with. North Korea may blow up. I have no idea. What can you do about it, aside from have a plan for your folks in South Korea if anything looks troublesome? That's about all you can do. Pakistan's a bit like that from a macro perspective. And let's keep in mind, there are lots of upside risks that you can't really plan for either. 5 years ago, who of you were actually planning for dramatically reduced gas prices in the States compared to Europe because of the development of unconventionals, right? And yet, now it's huge. There will be other upsides like that as well. Most of them will hit the United States. And again, that's a significant plus. It's hard to turn a Pakistan question into anything optimistic, but I've tried.
Sean. Right up in front, please.
John Cook from the City UK. I was very interested in what you said about Africa at the very end of your presentation. It was almost a sort of throwaway line. And I just wondered if you had more to say on the development of Africa and what we could expect from the point of view of all the things that we have been discussing today on liberalisation of trade, the role of services, that sort of thing.
Well, I think what's interesting about Africa is that historically you've seen it as, an incredibly poor region, and you've seen it as a place that you can go and you can strip resources from. And that's basically it. Increasingly, Africa is not something you should be thinking about as a commodities play. It is about rapidly urbanizing people, most of whom are not middle class, most of whom are still quite poor. But you've got 700 million cell phones in Africa out of 1.1 billion people. That's a lot. And they've got bank accounts. And they have the ability to act as consumers. And so they can buy a Coke, they can buy a beer, they can buy single-serving packages from J&J and P&G and Unilever, and they do. And increasingly, they can buy more expensive things. I mean, Nigeria, the other side of the coin, the whole country had 20 corporate jets back in 2007. They have 150 now, right? I mean, wealth is being developed in these countries. Demographic trends are bad, but when you bring people into the cities, they're too high. But the family numbers are they're going to fall off a cliff as you start educating women. And that's a really positive development. You know what, I compared Africa to India before. One of the really interesting things about India that McKinsey and the World Bank completely missed is that Indian consumer development right now is growing faster in the regions, in the rural areas, than it is in the cities. On the one hand, that's great because it's sustainable even if you don't do infrastructure well. On the other hand, it explains to you why it is the Indians can't do reform. Because the government is not going to support the push for, different types of educational systems or more open FDI coming into the country or changes in tax reform, because that's not what the 2/3 of the folks that live in the rural areas consider their priorities. They want to make sure they continue to get agrarian subsidies. Well, that's not going to help the folks that want to invest in India. It's stable, but it doesn't have the trajectory. Africa is less stable, but the trajectory is actually much higher for the reasons that we've discussed. Again, I understand you can get 55 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and India is one on a good day. But there are comparisons that deserve to be made. And if you gave me an hour, we could do a whole talk just about Africa, and then I wouldn't treat it as one country. And we talk about some of the countries that are very attractive and why. But generally speaking, when you think about a place that's that big, that historically we've looked at as such a no-go zone unless you happen to be in mining or oil, suddenly it's relevant to 95% of the folks in this room. And when the American law firms and when the accounting firms start going in, I point to Sam, right? And they start setting up in these countries in a big way, then the Western multinationals say, oh, well, I can go there because my guys have an office and they can help me out and I'm not completely by myself, right? That matters too. And so I really think we've hit the tipping point on Africa. And I think the next decade is the African decade. And it's not just South Africa, it's not just energy exploitation and commodities. It's really the taking off of Africa as a destination for FDI and as a consumer market. And that is truly a very exciting story.
Ian, I was wondering if you could discuss the upcoming U.S. elections and any impact you see that might have on some of the trends that you're discussing around the world.
It's clear that Obama has an advantage. It was clear that Obama had an advantage before the events of the last couple of days. I'm not someone who believes that Romney is out of it after having done the 47% club. I think the money matters. I think most Americans, it's so easy to see 47% when you're on Twitter, when you read the Washington Post, and all of your friends are people that write about this stuff constantly. It's like, oh my God. Most Americans, independent voters in these swing states, it's not affecting them, and it won't affect them. And in 2 weeks' time, it will be all forgotten about, even though they read like one headline on it, saw it for 2 minutes, maybe on Jon Stewart. It's not right. It's not impactful. Actually, likely in their local newspaper. So I still think Romney has a shot, and right now I'd probably put it at about 35%. I think that from a foreign policy perspective, there's been big debates. Romney is trying very hard to paint the Obama administration as apologists, as declinists, as leading from behind, and as unpatriotic. And that's consistent. You see that on Russia, when they say that Obama is trying to just, cozy up to Medvedev while Putin doesn't care and it's against American interests. You see them say that on China. Romney's saying they're going to declare China currency manipulator on day one. Obama's soft on China. You hear him saying it on Iran. They're going to go nuclear under Obama, not on my watch. You hear him saying it on Israel. I like Israel. Obama's completely forgotten about them. You see him now saying it on Libya and Egypt and all the rest. I get it. And certainly a Romney administration would have different tone than Obama. But in terms of actual foreign policy substance, I think the differences between both administrations on most of those issues is virtually undistinguishable. Bob Zellick, were he to become Secretary of State, I know him well. I see him as very simpatico with Hillary Clinton on most of these issues, certainly on trade. He doesn't like TPP, by the way. Folks that don't know that, he would much prefer to see U.S.-Japan bilat. And the reason for that is because he thinks it's doable. And he thinks TPP is too complex and will take too long, it doesn't get you there. But that's a technical point. He likes it, if you could get there, he likes it. He just doesn't think you can get there. But ideologically, he's actually very similar. In China, he's very similar. The one big difference, and Israel, yeah, sure, but small, and I don't see Romney actually giving the Israelis, saying, yeah, go and blow up Iran, and the Israelis aren't going to do it by themselves. But on Saudi Arabia, there would be a difference. The Saudis don't like Obama. They don't trust Obama. It's not a surprise because the oil CEOs don't like Obama. And the Saudis don't have many leaders, right? It's not like you've got a strong institutional relationship. They've got a few people in the royal family, and the guys they talk to in the United States really don't like Obama, and with pretty good reason. And so the Saudi relationship, the Saudis in the Middle East, in some ways are the most constructive and most stable force over the long term. That's painful to think about, you know, because of the bar. But no, but after the demonstrations in Egypt, and after what happened in Libya, in Benghazi with our ambassador, the Saudis came out and they called for calm immediately. And that's because they're insulated from their people. And they can spend money. And so they can act more strategically, and they can act longer term. And they do that with OPEC policy as well. But Obama's relationship with the Saudis is not good at all. It really lacks trust. If Romney came in, I think that relationship would improve immediately and dramatically. But that's really it. That's really it. I can't think of another part of the world where we'd see a dramatic change. There's one other thing I want to say, which is that I suspect that most of you are kind of thinking that if Obama comes in a second term, John Kerry becomes Secretary of State. And I know that the policy wonk community desperately wants that. In the last 2 days, my views on that have changed. Having spoken with a lot of insiders in Washington, that Obama apparently feels he really owes Susan Rice. They're very, very close, and that Kerry's stock has gone down in part because of Kerry's relative closeness to trying to get the administration to move with Bashar Assad before all this happened, open up Syria. And Rice was on the other side of that. Susan Rice is untested, she's not as capable intellectually, and she's not as respected internationally. I hope people don't get offended by that, right? I think that's just an objective fact. No, I really do. It's not nothing against anything. We're talking. We're talking. Can you tell I'm from New York? I think that will inject a lot of uncertainty in American foreign policy if she gets it and Obama wins. In that scenario, Donald stays as National Security Advisor. In that scenario, actual policy making in the White House stays pretty consistent, but Susan Rice is out there and out there loud. There is volatility in that. That's interesting, right? That's worth studying. I haven't done much work on it myself, neither has our firm, because 2 weeks ago I would have told you not going to happen. And I'm changing my views on that, so that's interesting.
Well, I'm told by the powers that be, I'm sorry, but I'm told by the powers that be that we must end now. As usual, Ian is ahead of us. He's got a drink in his hand. Let's join him and do the same after we give him a warm round of applause.